Robert Glick is the author of the short story collection Two Californias, which, side note, I have put this on the board because I forgot to type up a little thing to sell the books in the back. So you can pay via Venmo, and these beautiful broadsides from Anne Royston, who's a brilliant scholar and letterpress artist. Robert Glick is the author of the short story collection Two Californias, in addition to being a short story writer and these days a novelist. Glick is an associate professor of English at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where he teaches creative writing, electronic literature, and the occasional course on zombies. His work has been published in Diagram, Denver Quarterly, and Gettysburg Review, and more recently excerpts from his novel in progress, The Asterisms, have won competitions in summer literary seminars and New Ohio Review. I originally invited Robert Glick to read at HWS in April of 2020. Soon after his terrific book came out, my students were supposed to read its time-shifting, brain-batteringly tender novella in collaged parts and a number of equally wondrous stories ahead of the reading, and then lockdown happened. But I have clung for 2 years to the prospect of having Robert Glick still read for us in person. I'm so delighted to finally have the chance. Side note, we're going to have a short Q&A at the end, so be thinking of questions. Robert visited my Intro to Creative Writing class this morning, and it was a wonderful conversation. It was really, really lovely, so I'm sure he would love to hear your questions. I love rereading a beautiful book ahead of writing an introduction because it requires me to do the task I'm always asking my creative writing students to do, the engine analysis, the what's causing that story's tick-to-talk assignment. Reading this way for movement, for pattern, for grace, when you're reading really good writing is highly pleasurable. In rereading Two Californias slowly over the last couple of weeks, I've been struck by the strange ways we end up knowing what we know about Glick's characters, whether through their weirdo syntax, through their often bad gut reactions and instincts, through the things they do when they think no one is watching. One method of characterization that feels distinctly Glickian to me is what I like to call, in my deep love of made-up literary terms, anecdotal metonymy, which is to say, sometimes Glick finds exactly the tiny narrative detail, the flash of lyrical scene that manages to stand in for an entire person, part for the whole. As with the boy who, and I'm going to give you a bunch of examples of this, and you'll get an understanding for the scale of what we're working with here. As with the boy who has broken something expensive, who is sure to get in big trouble for it, and so who stands for 10 minutes exactly in his closet, his face pressed against a dark corner. Or the boy who watches his parents fight from inside the jacuzzi. He watches his parents fight from inside the jacuzzi with the heavy octagonal cover that smelled like a skateboard wheel, pushing the cover up a sliver to peek out, and later his fraught mother who climbs into the jacuzzi with him, clothes and all, for a talk. Or the man in the silver BMW who is short 10 cents of the $1.15 he needs to get out of the parking garage. He has more money in his wallet, sure, but getting money out of a wallet is such a hassle. But the parking attendant won't overlook it, and so as he unbuckles his seatbelt, the man thinks to himself about how he wants to staple the attendant's fingers into the slit of the time clock. I think of the girl who nails a crucifix directly on top of her door's peephole, or the stripper who has a tattoo of a parthenogenic shark, a female that didn't require a male shark for reproduction. The shop owner alcoholic who deliberately throws pennies down the sidewalk saying, "Some kid's lucky day," and generosity allows humans to live with themselves. Or the internationally renowned zombie studies professor who, as a boy, refused to cry during his brother's funeral and so developed a pus-filled cyst on his tear duct, which eventually exploded, the infection almost blinding him, and who likened zombies to the cyst, the symbolic taking physical form. I think of how he changes the word spectral to liminal, and then back to spectral in his email declaring his retirement from zombie studies. or the girl whose voice sounded like right angles, though soft like the felt that protects the corners of picture frames, and of the semi-orphaned Dutch tourist who is vacationing friendless in San Francisco, who makes that observation about the girl with the right-angled voice, speaking himself at times like an almost Allen Ginsberg translated into Dutch and then back into English, sounding version of talking, sentences hinged in the middle and veering off. The ACT UP member and founder of a needle exchange program with giant gray eyes, who for years had returned indeterminate HIV tests, neither positive nor negative, but certainly positive, who would lie in bed for days debating whether it was worth it to spend money on a new toothbrush. And I think of the son with a newly dead father, who when most paralyzed by his father's illness, spent hours crudely chipping icicles from the freezer, and who painted his cool racing bike matte black, the theory being that a cheap-looking bike was less likely to be stolen, though it was originally Bianchi's Celeste Blue, rumored to be the color of the Milan sky. Can a character be funny and weird and exaggerated and human and faulty and moving in a single swipe? Apparently, yes, in Glick's terrific stories. What an absolute pleasure, a pleasure 2 years sharper when it comes 2 years late, to introduce to you the vibrant, startling original writer and my dear friend, Robert Glick.
Parentheses, cries before. First of all, I want to echo what Catherine said. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to be in person with people, to do readings, to have conversations about the writing. To see you, especially, I know spring break's starting, and so like you've got imaginary drinks in your head already. So I'm just really, really super appreciative. Thank you. More thanks, Catherine. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you, everybody here. To the brilliant, wonderful students that I got to hang out with a little bit. I wish we could have hung out longer. You've already got the drinks in your head. And to the Writers in Reading and Trias Residency for Writers series. This is just, it's hard to see this when you're inside of it, but it's just, it's been such an absolute gem, this series. You know, it's 50 minutes from here to Rochester, but we come whenever we can. The writers are brilliant, they're so generous, and it creates a community with you that's just super, super wonderful. So thank you for all of that. In the back, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so sometimes when you read from two different books, you find weird things that happen in both because you're almost randomly, not randomly, but sort of wantonly, that's the wrong word, oh my God. Randomly, wantonly seeing things that have nothing in common except for the passages. So this reading is going to be either called Feral Kids with Absent Parents, or Lots of Characters Who Know How to Pick Locks. Okay. I'm not sure which, but you're going to see those for some reason I don't understand in both. I'm going to start with a section from my novel in progress, which is called The Asterisms, and then move on to a story from Two Californias, or shorthand 2C, from Mermaid Anatomy. So before I get started on this section, let me give you some background on the asterisms. For those of you interested in asterism, has meanings in astronomy, gemology, and typography. It's related to an asterisk, actually, in a weird way. An asterism in typography is 3 asterisks in a triangle. But in astronomy, what it is, I can't see it with my glasses on, so I'm going to be doing this. So what an asterism is it's a network of stars that we know about that is not an official constellation. So the Big Dipper is an asterism. I'm sure there are others. And I like to think about this as a way that we can sort of rethink how we reconfigure what a family is. So that's sort of the guiding principle to the novel. Brief plot summary, set in Kansas City during the 2016 presidential election. With chapters narrated by each family member, The Asterisms follows the indirect pathways taken by the Deckel family as they recover from their personal tragedy. So it's not really about the tragedy, but how that sort of spins, the rest of the world, the way that, how do pearls work? You get sand and stuff. It's sort of like that. I have no idea how pearls work. So from there it gets weird. There's Bosnian performance artists, there's raptures that are housed in pet hospitals, there's lots of scavenging through abandoned houses, and there are organizations who champion the personal rights of inanimate objects. There are 3 chapters in the book that are sort of flashbacks, and I'm going to read from one of them. So it's not sort of the main thrust of the book, but it's a little bit on, I was feeling sort of lively and light and didn't want to be too sad today. So I'm thinking, we're going to see how this goes, but I think it's going to be on the lighter side. You never know. So what you're going to be doing is meeting Grace, who's a teenager, who's about 14 at the time, or G. You're going to see in the middle of it that everybody gets initials, so you'll have to translate Grace to G. But in most of the book, Grace is 40. She's a mother of 2, and she is a successful anesthesiologist. You won't see that here. This chapter is called Capers of the Girl Moriarty's, parts 1 through 4. And it details a summer when, as you'll find out, her parents simply disappeared without telling anyone, and then returned without saying why 9 months later. So this summer where the parents are gone. The chapter ends with Grace actually chloroforming her grandma, but you don't get to hear that part. So, things get, I want to make sure, I want to live in a world where we have stories, where we have plots that move and characters that are deep, but we're doing these in sort of unorthodox ways. So, lyric, poetics, different time signatures. This is what I hope is possible in at least my own writing. All right, let's get to work. Actually, I'm gonna do this. We are the girl Moriartys, and these are our capers, 1 through 4. We followed Grace because she was taller and could find extremes the way a rock climber found a jag in the slick. She had the gumption and a desperate intelligence. Even when we didn't agree, we imagined ourselves as sharing the same body, like a Cupid doll with 8 eyes, 16 wayward limbs clawing for sparse oxygen in Colorado's high-altitude air. We all had something that had recently undone us. Shireen's parents had 2 separations, one in March, and then they came back together watching crane migrations in Nebraska, and then they split up again. Death Star threw a rock through the chem lab window, certain that it would bounce or crack, astounded that it left a rock-sized hole. Jo lost her front teeth playing field hockey, and 6 months ago, Grace's parents disappeared. We sat in Jo's room. She was picking at the stickers of ponies on her trundle bed. It was late May, and many winged blurs of yellow were still crossing the window, resistant to gravity, keeping horizontal, keeping north. No bird is as good as a quetzal, said Grace. We didn't dispute her claim. Last summer, her parents had taken her to Mexico, where they had bought her a quetzal charm on a silver necklace. Quetzals, Grace told us, were the rare jewel birds of the world, gods of the air. The silver was slightly rusted because after they disappeared, Grace never took it off, not even in the shower. Grace, who had once again that morning vacuumed her parents' entire room, opened up the bag and found no clues, nothing but her grandma's hair and a blue sari piece. She bemoaned the dearth of whip-smart girl detectives. What about Harriet the Spy? Asked Shireen. She's observant. I suppose, said Grace. But take Nancy Drew. She's good at her trade. I'll give her that. Born in a dumpster, risen through the ranks to a bed made of saffron and honey. Did you know that in some cultures, an inquisitive virgin is known as a Nancy Drew? And that Miss Marple wore daisy knickers? We agreed that an inquisitive virgin is known as a Nancy Drew, and that Miss Marple could have worn no knickers but daisy knickers. Since we couldn't allow certain things to perch on our shoulders, we wandered around Boulder, scampering the hills in search of trilobites, scratching our fingers into the chalky dirt, fearful of the stray cougar that came down every few years when food was scarce. We took the bus to the bookstore, the four of us draped over a soft leather chair, yearning for enigmatic dedications. Dear ones, for whom words are dearer. To Jillian, when the going gets rough, the rough get reading. The bench by the police station gave us splinters. Not once did anyone scuff down the stairs. No shifty eyes who fit the exonerated yet guilty profile. No one worthy of our double jeopardy. No mystery to unearth, much less to solve. Depressed, we sat against the chain link fence at the basketball court by our school. Butts on blacktop, our legs splayed. Someone had painted a grapefruit under the hoop, had left a dried maple leaf taped to the bathroom door, had written choke bones on the handball wall. Grace said, my mom would tell my dad not to choke on the bones, and my dad would get mad. Shh, he'd say, I'm thinking about what the fish hears. We didn't respond. We knew not to think anything was weird or funny or sad or unrealistic. Grace was always telling us how her parents were running encoded messages by foot through the Sahara Desert or engineering components for cloaked space stations. A group of boys skated through the playground, the wheels clicking over the cracks. Grace pulled up the thin, bright orange shirt that kept sliding off her shoulder. A little bit of Madonna teased into everything. A slash of neon over black pants. We wore our hair short. We brushed our teeth a lot. Except for Joe, our braces were gleaming, and our socks still had animals on them. Being a detective is boring, Grace said. You act like a detective, said Death Star, every day. Grace couldn't deny it. She had fine-tooth combed every drawer, pulled every fingerprint, and had found nothing but a bottle of turpentine in the bedroom closet, a Spanish dictionary under a bedpost, and a newspaper clipping about a shipwreck in Lake Superior. She had even taken her grandma's house key. Nothing there either. Only an ornate bamboo birdcage and some neatly pressed slacks in the closet, as if her grandpa hadn't been dead already for 10 years. Detectives, Grace said, they want to sleep soundly, but there's more to life than sleep. We agreed. It bored us, being girl detectives. It was June now, and we had our first day of extra heat. Only 3 of us could fit under the grand piano in Grace's living room. So when Shireen successfully dragged Death Star out by the legs, Death Star had to hold a piece of cardboard at an angle over the air conditioning vent, redirecting all the cool air to us. Not girl detectives, exclaimed Grace. Girl villains. Girl villains, whispered Shireen, because Grace's grandma had asked us to whisper. And Shireen had the greatest attachment to rules. These days, Grace's grandma was oversensitive to stimuli. She had moved in 2 days after Grace's parents disappeared. Grace was certain that she knew something. She napped a lot, putting a thin pillow with an embroidered cat over her eyes. When she was awake, she made up sample survey questions that she sent to Family Feud. Villains, said Grace. They stay up for entire nights, dreaming the next caper into being. We discussed the best qualities of girl villains. Genius, creativity, guile. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. With their remote detonators, they didn't flaunt, they improvised. They built wardens for their lairs. Above all, they leveraged invisibility to an art form. No one knew about their crimes until much later, until they wanted the world to know. That means no evil stepmothers or wicked witches, said Grace. What did they accomplish? They looked in mirrors. They were cruel. They demanded unenviable labors. What about the Black Widow? Asked Shireen. Do you remember the Black Widow? This is from like 70s Batman. There were like all these campy things, right? That's Black Widow. What about the Black Widow? I don't know why I had to add that, but it was really important to me. What about the Black Widow? Asked Shireen. What about her? Grace glared at her. Obviously, Black Widow fell into the same category. Shireen sulked away from the piano. Death Star jumped back under. Grace said, she has stupid male henchmen. Plus, she has to be slinky. How does she even peel out of that rubber suit? Death Star mentioned that it took 13 hours for the original Frankenstein to get into makeup and costume. They put him in a hole, Death Star said, so he wouldn't touch anything. Joe said, I love this idea, but we need a name. She rearranged her gangly legs. She was tall and too thin like a model, and there were pink circles on her knees from where she sat on the carpet. How about the Villanelles? Do you even know what that is? Said Grace. Do you? Asked Shireen. Just prompting more discussion, Joe said. Death Star said, the semi-evil cuckoo crew. Pfft, said Grace. I don't want to be a villain, said Shireen. Every Sunday, my dad tells us that our mortal souls can barely stand the heat of living. The girl Moriarty's, said Grace. It's perfect. Don't tell me it's not. We didn't. From that moment on, the girl Moriarty's would be known by our initials. G for Grace, S for Shireen, J for Joe, and DS for Death Star, rather than K for Kelly, which to her sounded boring, an attorney's name. We moved to G's room for General Hospital, which we watched devotedly and skeptically. Only Jay thought love was like that. During commercials, we tried to find a worthy caper. A caper, G said, has an all-consuming goal, like heisting the Hope Diamond, something that blinds us with our sparkle. Think about what they would do in Port Charles. The villains hate something with a passion beyond passion because every little molecule of them, even the smell of cinnamon, it hits too close to home. The problem was, we didn't hate anything. Only DS had something like an archenemy, Steamy Trumbo, the chemistry yearbook teacher, who knew that DS had broken the windows of Cam Lab, but weirdly didn't rat on her. S wanted to spy on one of her parents, hopefully to find enough dirt to keep them apart. When they were together, they fought so much that a clump of S's hair fell out. DS's caper involved dirt itself. We tell people that we're working on a paleontology project, she said, and because we think that there are dinosaur bones in their backyard, we convince them to let us dig a massive hole in their backyard. And then what? Asked G, displeased. Then we dig a massive hole in their backyard. Can't you tell the difference, G said, between a caper and a prank? DS bounced on the couch, moping. It would be cool, she said. Like we could put a little plastic dinosaur in the hole, as a kind of ha-ha. What do you want to do? J asked G. We could hear G's grandma in the kitchen pressing fresh orange juice. She had kidney stones that she attributed to sadness. I want to tell you a totally separate story right now, but that's for another time. Size of a marble, G would say, a pool ball, a mandarin orange, shape of a heirloom tomato. The only thing that would work, G finally said, would be a revenge plot. I keep having this image that I'm strapping someone, maybe Steamy Trumbo, down on a gurney. We all agreed that maybe G, who was unbending the curve of a metal clothes hanger, was snorting too much air freshener. He's a perv, G asked DS. Right? He's been crushing every day on your crotch. He's not like that, said DS. Grace, said J. G, let it go. She had motivation not to anger Mr. Trumbo, as she had a crush on Baron Trumbo, one of his twin sons. Then why'd you throw the rock through his specific window, G said, like that wasn't something you could argue with. If he's my arch enemy, DS said, it's because he's got dirt on me. Not because he's a bad person. I don't want him drowning in a vat of acid. G smiled. She took the now pointy end of the hanger and stuck it into the top of the television. The picture, cleaner now, revealed a hospital gala fundraiser where all the women wore dresses of pearl-colored satin. Okay, she admitted, we'll take our baby steps. It's true, we don't know anything yet about the girl Moriarty's medal. We went to the public pool because it was hot out, and DS wanted an ice cream sandwich. We went back to Jay's backyard. In Jay's backyard, we practiced our gleeking. Do y'all know what gleeking is? Okay, good. I don't know what these, like, my childhood things. Okay, everybody knows what gleeking is, that's great. Only Jay, who wasn't getting replacement front teeth for another week, was a good gleeker. The rest of us looked ugly. We were saliva projectile units, lacking any real force or direction, and all the bushes got a weird oily sheen on them, like from a bubble maker. She arrived late to all night times because she had to eat TV dinners with her grandma. We returned to the police station for inspiration, and DS scraped the greenest pigeon poop off the bench, and S told her that it would get stuck in her nails forever. DS had pale, almost translucent skin that made her black hair, which her mom called a broken page boy, look glossy. Then we stopped in front of the print shop where they did our school newspaper and yearbook. G stopped. "Girl Moriarty's," she said. "We have our caper." We could see shards of carrot on her tongue from the juice she had gotten at the falafel restaurant. In the back of the print shop, a woman sat on a bench reading Glamour, and then a cat jumped onto the ledge right in front of us, and at least two of us gasped at the rotund, whiskery thing. "We're gonna steal their cat?" asked GS. "No," said G, "that." On a brown pedestal, a giant glass eye filled with jelly beans. First, we had to solve the Guess the Jelly Bean contest. $5 per guess, winner gets an all-expenses trip to Banff, Alberta, Canada. "Point of order," Jay said, addressing G. "Where's the revenge in a guessing game? It's not dastardly, and therefore doesn't fall under our definition of caper." "It still is," said G, "if you have a super strong motivation." We decided that S's parents needed the trip for romance, to save their marriage again. S hesitated. "I've seen them on vacation," she said, "and if that's happy," she made a farting sound with her mouth. According to DS, the caper was either simple geometry or basic physics. 1, what kind of jelly beans are they? 2, how much mass do the jelly beans take up? 3, the dimensions of the glass eye that held the jelly beans. 4, how high the jelly beans went up in the glass eye. She had taken the initiative to go to the store, had learned that the Jelly Belly company held the monopoly on jelly beans. "That means Reagan ate them," she said. We stood on the sidewalk in front of the print shop, measuring the width and height of the eye, and asking, was the fisheye a perfect circle or an imperfect circle? S took pictures and wouldn't let anyone touch her Polaroid. We agreed that the jelly beans, mostly orange and purple, went almost to the cornea. We agreed that the eye was 80% filled. From the print shop owner's perspective, we must have looked like 4 girls with fanciful imaginations, messing around with 3 rulers and a camera, whizzing sightlines through the air. To him, we were just girls. We were not Girl Moriartys. 2 nights later, though, we dressed ourselves in black and snuck behind the print shop, where there were no alarms. Why? Because according to G, our calculations were too imprecise. She had been reading the collected works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, where neither detective nor villain ever acted sloppily. "A guess is a guess," G said. "I don't want to purchase a bunch of tickets unless we're Girl Moriarty certain." "I want to see how a print machine works," said DS. "Maybe all the letters just fly in the air." Everybody ignored her. The fancy of DS was legendary but impractical. "I really don't know," said S. "All my parents do is buy me Hostess fruit pies and confide in me all the mean things the other one did." "Get to work," G said to her. G sniffed at her hands. Her grandma had congestion in her chest, and G always helped put on the vapor rub, even if it disgusted her. Then she put on a hot washcloth with some lavender over her grandma's mouth. "The sooner we are in," she said, "the sooner we're done." S started picking locks because she wanted to read her mom's diary. Now she knew how to do certain door locks and even older cars. DS played lookout. J held the flashlight close to the lock. "It's a question of good ears," S whispered to G. "Think of a tree and still wind. Think about hearing the insects crawling inside the tree." S had amazing fingers and crack-shot ears. 2 minutes and we were in. The hardest part was that the tabby kept getting curious. DS continually had to whisk her away. We worked hunched over because the blinds were open. S's flashlight went out. It took all four of us to get the glass eye off the pedestal, to tip all the jelly beans as quietly as we could onto the floor. We each had a box, which we knew contained between 370 and 380 jelly beans, no matter the flavor. We simply had to fill a box, empty the jelly beans back into the eye, and keep track of the number of boxes plus the leftover. Why couldn't they have a normal-sized jar, said Jay, like normal people? I wish they were jellyfish, said DS, not jelly beans. Headlights drove past, and we dove down, and we got quiet. Or Jolly Ranchers, said Jay, who had arrived late. For the first time, Baron had recognized Jay's presence. They had sat for hours at the McDonald's. Now she was ecstatic and distracted, voraciously eating our stash of jelly beans. Why? Because once she got her new teeth, she wouldn't be allowed to eat chewy things until all the tooth glue hardened. When we had finished, DS got onto her stomach to look for spilled jelly beans. Jay put the cover back atop the eye. G made sure the scratch in the glass was facing the cash register. We straightened the cat's fur and left, feeling so full of villainy. We skulked between houses. We looked up through the pines. We imagined all the nests, the eggs cracked open from the inside by those tiny beaks, the parent birds pulling worms out of the grass, how the worms still wiggled. G did the skip hop thing, saying it was a tribal dance wherever her parents were. As S ran, she held her shirt away from her body because Jay had written the final jelly bean count in permanent marker on her stomach. Jay only wanted to talk about Baron. DS felt giddy, like she had slurped an entire can of Ready Whip. Is each step a caper, she asked, or is the whole shebang one big caper? At the branching point to our houses, we hugged each other to good night. We were still so full of villainy. We agreed that our initial calculations, being 230 jelly beans off, warranted the need to face such danger. Each of us spent time dreaming some version of S's parents making up and taking S to Yellowstone to see moose and bears and the millions of cool night stars backdropping this cool night moon. Thank you. So you can just kind of imagine how we get from there to chloroforming a grandparent. Oh, and now it gets hard for me. Okay, so now we're moving back a bit. That's more recent stuff, and it's in this, as I said, this sort of giant novel that has, many different points of view, each one has different voices, that kind of stuff. So now we're going to move back to California's and to Mermaid Anatomy, which is probably the most, I'm going to put this in scare quotes, experimental and lyric piece in the collection. I'm going to read the second half of it, so, and I know some of you have read little parts of it, is this true? Hi everybody, I can see you again, you're not just blurry. This is good. So I'm going to get you up to speed. Our unnamed protagonist is this Dutch man. He's maybe 20 or so. I lived in Holland for a bunch of time. And he takes a trip to San Francisco to try to shake off, a sort of period of depression he's going through that's in part because his grandparents have really recently passed away and he grew up with them. His parents died when he was young. So he's in a bit of a funk. There he meets Lena, who to him is some kind of manic pixie dream girl space. And so I think there's a little bit of, for me it's like Revenge of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl a little bit, but to him he thinks that something has happened very wrong with her and he thinks that he will be a dude if he can figure this out. He wants to save her. But what she does is, she sends him on these kinds of absurdist performance installation art missions. She makes him go gather an object from this ship that has recently come off the beach. And this happened in San Francisco about 15 years ago where there's any San Franciscans here, Bay Area people? There's a really, the really Long Beach Ocean Beach is, at some point in time, people use it every day, but the ship sort of came out of it because there was erosion of the sand, and it turned out to be this like Chinese indentured servant ship that had won aground there in the 1860s, I think. And it had just, nobody knew it was there. There were no archive records of it. It was super, that's another story. So Lena sends this protagonist on this mission. He, as in Max Manic Pixie Dream Girl Away, sort of falls in love with her. We pick up where he is in the hostel feeling bad about himself, not knowing if she is going to recontact him. Okay, the thing you should know about this otherwise is that if you look at this, there's no commas in this piece. And all of the paragraphs are sort of they're little sections on their own. And at the time, for the poets in the place, I was thinking about the poet Charles Olson, and it was projective verse, I got this all wrong, where he talks about the breath being the sort of common denominator of poetry, and he prioritizes the breath. And so what you're gonna see is me trying to do these things in one breath, and actually, so it's a kind of endurance test for me as I do it to see, I don't intend to pass out. That's never happened. But don't freak out if you see me sort of trying to get through this, because, for me, part of the way the sound works in this is what happens when you don't punctuate in sort of normal ways. All right, part 2 of Mermaid Anatomy, or rather parts 3 and 4. Do I want more water before I do? Now, arriving back at the hostel, I expected Lena with scaling impulses, waiting for me with battery clamp in mittened hand, an explanation to part the beaded curtain of my half-consciousness, but instead all the backpackers were blending their unique granola concoctions, plotting against the ennui of their beatnik days. Some people were driving to Mystery Spot, where the laws of gravity didn't exist, where billiard balls rolled uphill. One person inquiring for work received a generous offer from a made-to-order dildo boutique. If dreams of molds of teeth meant the same thing as dreams of teeth. How Lena's eyes, gigantic and dilated as if blind until that moment, taking the object from me through the cracked hull. Remembering dimly that to save the mermaid from sea foam, I must recognize her as the creature who saved me from the shipwreck. Me dreaming me as her first vision. All day, I didn't brush my teeth or go to my room, staying in the common area in awkward recline on the tie silk couch, watching for Lena. The untethering weightlessness and wind of the kite ballasted by the mutilation of flippers. Scales of waxen wings melting free fall, the inconsequent splash in the sunstruck sea. Whatever this potential delivery into calm, lit as a Christmas tree the brachii of my lungs. Everything glossy traveled quickly through air, and each time I told myself I was happy, I became a little more happy. For eating a ham and butter sandwich with a knife and fork, other backpackers jokingly teased me, which made me feel a part of something. Proud for exceeding the orbital pull of my quiet, I struck up a chat with the lamb-chopped smoothie maker who explained why gunfights in graveyards in Western movies were rarely conclusive. Sadly, by nightfall, my mind started inuring itself to the flat reassembly of my initial plans. The number 14 bus route to the mission, where I would eat a Nicaraguan breakfast of frijoles negros, crema y plátanos. Waking up at 4:30, grinding my teeth horribly, I had forgotten to put in my mouth guard. Miserably unable to see Lena as the antidote to my eyes. All these homeless symbols. 2 nights without her, I proved myself to her, taking different routes to the city, based on the first letter of each ingredient in a Twix bar correlative to tenderloin straight names, counting the blinks of eyes I determined left and rights, funneling up to a signless place locals called No Name Sushi, where they sold fugu made from textured vegetable protein, hopefully removing the fake poison. Even wearing neon orange earplugs, my cochlea radiated and dissolved again, and again listening to a noise band made up of voice, guitar, drums, and vacuum cleaner. Reminding me of Oma, who as part of a radical socialist group stole all the fire extinguishers prior to tossing Molotovs into reactionary movie theaters. who on days when I felt imprisoned by the imaginary hospital bars of my small bedroom cot would tap, tap, tap on my temples in Morse code. By candlelight, drunk in the hospital, a woman with a pierced cheek told me how last summer, by moonlight, she got paid to pick the slugs off the organic crops, killing them into a bucket of salt water. But unable to implement such fluid genocide, she dropped the living slugs at the property's edge, thus keeping her in work, since the slugs each night returned. It would have been a maki to mate with her, but for fear of Lena's visitation. Without Lena, I grew increasingly weighted and lardish. Nutter butters glommed to the tongue, tasting like wet clay. The next 2 days, I hardly left my room, thinking of Dean Moriarty's boxcar benches and Allen Ginsberg's beard littered with pasta scraps and eraser shavings. Early the third morning, I drank in dark bars with tight, steep steps to basement bathrooms with saloon door stalls, and whiskeys. Later in bright light, I came out squinting to life itself, finding me in Japantown. Sitting on a bench in front of Benny's front door, Benny is another character from earlier, sitting on a bench in front of Benny's front door, unable to move, I read the newspaper inking out another suicide off the Golden Gate Bridge where girls broken back by the fall relinquished themselves to the cold, fast current swifting them out to sea. Certain now that the mermaid in all her girlish desire represented some traumatic, degraded time, Lena's legs, unlike the battery clamp, unopened. I remembered that in order to truly desire a mermaid flippering green and kelpie, you had to force yourself to forget she had no sex. Despondent, I prayed for an earthquake to uncommit me through a crack in the floor. The night before my flight, I lost the hostel's corkscrew, estimating if I broke the bottle, how much cheap Chilean wine would I lose, how much glass my stomach could grind down. Sniffing my armpits acrid of iron, I managed to sludge myself to the corner store, where I saw someone shoplift a mirror and nail polish remover, and me envious of the waterfall of shame or any strong emotion in which the thief would later bathe. When I returned, Lena, with her rust-colored hair, was leaning one thigh on a fire hydrant, blowing the sweet, sweet exhale of a candy cigarette up into the descending sky. Final part. Each time DeBoard the scooter hit a pothole, Lena's wings of scapulae sharpened, and I tightened my stomach so as not to lurch forwards, concussing my head against her helmet. Between us on the rubber floorboards, patterned with Maori tattoo, sat a purple-strapped duffel bag, its logo of silvery winged shoes. This immovable space between us, like sixth graders slow dancing. My fake mom riding me on the back of her Oma feets, touching my hand so I could hold tighter before crossing the tram tracks at the entrance to Rembrandt Park, us plugging our noses passing the Renault garage. At a red light, I asked Lena, "Did Benny give you the bowl of fortune cookies?" Lena lifted her fiberglass face mask, saying, "I didn't leave any fortune cookies." There was a crescent of militia blackout under each eye. The replicant Rutger Hauer, who's Dutch, said to the scientist who gave him sight, "If only you could see what I've seen with your eyes." If mermaids saw color in abyss where the pressure can crush a combination safe. "You just went home without us?" I asked. "Sorry, I've lost my tongue." Lena went through the light before it greened. A nursery that sold palm trees inside terracotta pots reminded me of Chinese warriors readying for battle in great lines through the great lonely weeds. Warriors, the unburned brown of the single gingerbread cookie Oma rationed to me each day after school. Scarcity and restraint declared sacred in Holland as a blank church wall. The parking lot we pulled into jutted out over the bay, renovated lofts to the left, a road to the right, a tall fence in front, locking us out of a small park. Broken glass bottles concreted into the top of the fence, warding off pigeons, unzippered lovers, and saboteurs. The peaceful gauze of the scooter's motor, winding down, allowed me to ask Lena, "Is Benny meeting us?" With her unhelmeting came the smell of salt, as if seawater evaporated on her skin. Silence is an elephant, she said, putting her finger over her lips. Undoubtedly, this entire area mounded from landfill. Having upturned our country from loam, we Dutch carried in our hearts a soft spot for building something out of nothing, trenching mud from the underbelly of the sea. What did it mean exactly to have a soft spot in your heart? Some said a glass of red wine first thing in the morning killed the worms in your heart. Some said Amsterdam was founded at the coordinates of a dog's sick. Unsurprisingly, there stood a statue of a mermaid on a matte silver pedestal, some replica of the original Little Mermaid, which I saw in Copenhagen near a hippie commune converted from a military base. The mermaid in Copenhagen fronting the placid harbor, the stunning white wind generators across the bay in Malmö like giant mixers slicing up the sky, and Greenlandic Eskimos slumming down the nearby housing projects. Sure now that Lena's stories culminated here, under the polyp eye of the mermaid. Something queasily sexual, I thought, on the slatted park bench or in the clawfoot bathtub used as a planter for white lilies, and the mermaid with her serpentine hair covering each unsculpted nipple. From the duffel bag, Lena handed me a plastic pouch and the trident-pronged end of a long power cord. The outlet's there, she said, showing me the plug on the nearest loft. Disable the camera first. I guess we're doing something illegal, I said. You know what's illegal? Her voice, unhoarse, unscratchy, unrolling a set of lock-picking tools from the oilcloth. What's illegal is the blatant disruption of local psychogeography, the unforgivable obstruction of the dérive, the inhumane powers that satisfy oppression in a given environment. So we're doing something illegal, I said, drawing out lengths of cable. Me glittering so hard to accelerate for Lena some psychic aperture through the collision of fat, sluggish molecules, I resolved not to beg for past or future, not to scavenge for her story, Lena whispering into the hole of the lock. On a brick ledge under the camera eye, I saw that the plastic pouch Lena gave me was filled with a gum called Big League Chew. Pink with white powder burns compressed and helixed like orphan DNA. A spoiler low-tinted Honda drove sudden down the street, froze me, lengthened me in light, and I ground down my teeth. Stretching, I held the stem of the camera in one hand, pushing the gum so it spread over the lens, making us divinely invisible. Then wiping off my fingerprints, removing the trace of me. The cable plug entering the socket let through a lucky warm white spark. Upon skipping back to Lena, who had long since picked the lock, who pointing ruefully said, "It's so oppressively leaden here, see how it gathers around her head." I tried to fathom that lead halo, which didn't reveal itself. Down the coast at the baseball stadium, seagulls flew figure eights, mini eclipses fronting the banks of fluorescent lights. Me remembering one summer in Venice with Oma and Opa, seagulls at night winging like this over a backlit colonnade. My grandfather charmingly failing to father me, trying over pasta made black with squid ink to span the gaps of dark matter in my lineage, said as the seagulls mistook the bright light for daylight, they never slept and driven crazy would die forever driven towards that light. It was the most beautiful thing I ever saw and the saddest thing I ever saw. Lena had now set a chainsaw on the moist soil strung out with violets, and now drew a line of air from it to the mermaid's neck. I picked it up, let my fingers run over the saw teeth like a child's drawing of waves, desperate for Lena to chip her story back into meaningless, discrete chunks, and yet uneasy, craving its opposite. Lena, so far past her own powers, she couldn't decapitate the mermaid herself, requiring me as henchman, as ritual sacrifice to the mermaid king, who demands for his daughters, men bloating face down in the sea, or as ravager, destroyer, to lay waste to what? I pulled the chain, the blinding noise, the wisp, the pluming smoke. Unable to gaze at the mermaid as I cut, daggering chips of marble. How I wanted Lena's ragged nails to stopper my ears. Desperate, the shriek of noise, in love with noise, until the spark and grind of the saw momentarily stuck on the steel spinal column. Finally, the head plunked into the soil. Lena let out a whoop, again belying her tonguelessness. She made swimming motions with her arms, parting the air, as if its very consistency lightened before her, and in her I saw the arrhythmic line of my lost days no longer lashed to me, and the box of atrophy I had long secured around me in free fall like an open-walled construction elevator whose cable had been cut. I took up the head, indeed silver and heavy in my shuddering arms, offering it up apotropaic to Lena, positive she would throw the head into the water, as humans, having felt the mermaid's objection, must shunt her back to the sea. If mermaids could return from land to conch underwater sounds beyond the frequency of human ears, they would absolve our constraints. Lena, though, looked pale. She looked petrified. A charm of a praying mantis dangled the shadow of a scar in the hollow between her key bones. She started walking to her scooter, and I ran after her, lapsing into Dutch, saying, "Godverdomme, don't you want it?" She put her hand hard against my chest, me staggering backwards. "Jinx's palm," she yelled. "You must remain immobile." What happened to you here? For the first and only time, I saw her smile, her crimped smile. "Don't look between the legs of women," she said, walking away. "You'll turn to stone." Did she think I was imagining the shape of her body in her clothes, nothing like the shape of her body? Speeding, the scooter almost flew into the water before Lena angled it away. A light came on in a loft, supposedly the artist there bred from recycled steel, colossal, articulated scorpions, breathing fire into this cadmium night. Walking home, I hid the head under my shirt like a baby, knowing I had gotten not simply the wrong god, but the wrong mythology, not mermaid, but Medusa. Slitty, harsh steel welts on my stomach. So I retraced my steps back to the park, stuffing the head into the duffel bag with its silvery wings, slinging the bag over my shoulder. Furthering myself from the water, the mermaid's head grew shrunken and less meaningful. From an all-night convenience store selling frozen goat cubes, I bought for Oma and Opa candied almonds and keychains of Alcatraz. Searching for change in my shirt pocket, my hand haunted by the repulsing souvenir of Lena's repelling hand. I left the mermaid head in an alley where the still night air got small, where I could hear every single cooling unit in the city condensing, where pools of oily standing water shimmered, but to my great relief, chose not my flickering phosphenic vision to reflect. Thank you.
So we have time for a few questions, if anyone has questions for Robert.
Oh my God, hi. Yes, please.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm interested in, especially the way that, even just in the segments that you read aloud, it feels like you're intermingling and weaving in poetic theory, traditions of film, of art. I was wondering if you speak to the function of fiction as kind of bridging those different genres and media, or at least what role they play in your creative process.
That's super. How much time you got? First thing I should say by way of background, my master's degree is in performance art. So, and my bachelor's was in art history. So, for me, these have always been things that aren't so apart, right? We take our creative writing classes here and we take our art classes here. And I was just lucky enough, so that was never messed up, as being these strict divisions. There's, you probably all know that there's novels written in triplets. There's Autobiography of Red, which and Carson calls a novel. There's, so people are already doing these things. For me, they're important for a number of reasons, but one of them is that written language is only one way to express something that is utterly sort of inexpressible, right? Or at least is translated from this stuff, right? So we have written language, but we also have, dance, we have vision, we have all these sort of elements. And for me, what's interesting is how not only do they come from similar idea sets, but also how then when you translate one language into another language, interesting things happen. That totally didn't answer your question. But to me, it's super important. Like in this novel, there's a master's, like there's an entire master's thesis in the middle of it on rewriting canonical feminist performance art of the 1970s and 80s. What's it doing there? I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, but you probably also figured out that in this particular story, you've got mermaids, you've got Medusas, you have Guy Debord, so you have the Situationist International and all that stuff, and and he's involved both very much in the Situationists in terms of sort of physical. I mean, they didn't call it performance, but they were doing stuff in social and physical environments. Even before, in certain ways, they were writing stuff down. There's probably some other art stuff going in there. There's the Dean Moriarty, there's the Beats, because, which to me I'm sort of critical of, because, On the Road is, it's a dude's venture, right? And to be able to say this, this venture has problematics. I think I'll stop there. Did that answer that at all?
Very much so, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
I would encourage everybody, to read widely and to be wide in terms of different art forms, because they interpenetrate in so many really, really important ways. And you can write, like I was looking at some Lydia Davis pieces, they're literally sort of one-line scores for, or Julie Carr's Real Life, which is, they're real installations that people then wind up doing, right? So I really would encourage people to go to those places. I think they're really useful. Thank you. You let me rant. What else you got? Okay, Melanie, hi.
Hi. So that made me wonder if the girl Moriartys are performance artists.
I mean, in a way, I hadn't considered that. And in the novel, it's actually Grace's daughter that becomes sort of deeply invested in, performance installation spaces. I suppose one thing that you could say is that they seem to be quite aware of performing certain things and being viewed as performing certain things. So they know the eyes on them in a certain way. And it's certainly a different kind of intertextuality. Here it's movies, it's General Hospital. Do I have any General Hospital fans in the bunch? Be still my heart. So I think you might have a better theory on this than I do. I had not considered Girl Moriarty's as that, but they certainly are trying to rewrite certain things, right? So there's this sense of rewriting Moriarty-ness, who Anne likes to call hot priest, right? In the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes. Hot priest.
It's not just me.
No, I know it's not just me.
That's the whole thing.
So I might think that there's a rewriting and intertextuality more than there's a. It's by nature performative, of course, but I don't think they're thinking about it. I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that one. I don't know. I'm just gonna say that.
Thank you.
My General Hospital friend.
Yeah, if my mom's theory shows, I've seen probably hundreds of hours of it. Mostly as we're both kind of doing our separate ways. I'm really interested in the thing that Catherine noted in the introduction, but that I think shows up in a bunch of places in the pieces about like the kind of single radiant detail that gets us to an entire character, and the way that resonates or might resonate with certain kind of poetic or lyrical theories about like the economy of language or the kind of role of syntax and image. I don't know that I have a question other than do you see a kind of poetic connection there in a theoretical sense?
Yes.
And if so, where does that happen for you?
I'm going to say something that I think people will fight with me about. I am a super strong. I want at least my students to think about fiction in poetic terms. But, and this is where I will get a lot of pushback, and this is just me, I don't want it in thinking that you need to be flowery. What I want you to do is listen to the words you're using, right? And so, as I was thinking about this work, I'm using many more similes and metaphors than I usually do. But when I think about poetics, I think about sound. I think about sirens in Joyce. I think about, I've been reading work by the fiction writer Gary Lutz lately. I don't know if anybody had been looking, and so I'm just going to repeat this sentence. This is the last sentence from this story called Their Sizes Run Differently, and I'm going to try to do it. It's really hard. Let's see. Every song is the worst way I could think of to ask for what I did not yet know how not to want. Right, and I'm just, to me, these are like that's where I want the lyric to go. That's where I want the poetic to go. But also, the sort of opposite to that for me is this: once you get to the specific details, you get language that comes out of that, right? Unless you're messing around with Medusas, you don't get to figure out what apotropaic is, which to me was is the key to the entire story in a certain way. This sort of like protective warding off sensibility. So through detail and through, in particular, specific vocabularies, we get to poetic spaces. I don't think that's the only way, but I think that's how I conceive of it. Yes? No?
Yeah, no, that's
I
fascinating.
mean, I'm kind of indebted to you to say economy of language because I have no economy. I'm like the opposite of economy of language. It's very not economic. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. So when you mentioned Charles Olson, it got me thinking about Denise Levertov. And so I'm wondering how much of these characters and how much of this form you had predetermined before you started writing, and how much you kind of found along the way.
Both. I knew that when I wanted to start writing this, I wanted to work with long sentences. There's a story in here which I affectionately call Zombie 1, which is Release, which is set, like very few sentences, very long sentences. So it's sort of like I got from it, and that probably came from the last chapter of Ulysses, I'm gonna guess, from Molly's soliloquy, that I was thinking about that as in sort of this reversal in Zombie 1, to then take long sentences and be short with them. But the other part is Marguerite Duras and Carol Mazo. And this, what happens when you take a fairly short sentence and you give it a lot of white space so that it sort of has a kind of aura around it? Like, what does that do? So I was starting with all of that in my head. From there, you let the sentences take you where they go. So there's, if you look at it, there's some genuinely awkward moments, where you want punctuation to be very, very badly, and you could sort of hear me hiccuping on those. So I had certain constraints in my head that then, but to get too stuck to them, I think wouldn't have been good for me. Some people the constraint is everything, right? If you're, Christian Book is the obvious example, but some other constraint-based poets, Harriet Mullen to some extent, am I getting this? Yeah. I can't speak to Levertov because I know very little of her work, but some people where it's like you have to stick to the constraint, and the Olympian sensibility is get as creative as you can with that constraint. For me, it's start with the constraint and then see what that turns into, which is a Matthew Barney thing. Really, and this is something for me. So what Matthew Barney does, who I like to affectionately call the lesser ex-half of New York. And he was a frat boy too, but we won't start on this. He, in some of the drawing restraint books, talks about creation and then sort of installation, and then taking self-reflection and then taking one piece of the end product and starting afresh with something new from that. And that's how I kind of see it. That you take this little bit from what you've got and you kind of open it. Thanks. You're making me think. I'm tired of thinking. One more? Zero more? What should we do? Get beer?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody.